Our next session is about how to overcome pandemic disruption, right? Yeah. It's a good one because it's a topical session and it's all about how we can really provide AI for business continuity and action plan. And our moderator for this session is Cade Metz, who's a technology correspondent for the New York Times. Hello if you're there, and I believe you have we've got a hybrid panel for you, some online, some in person. I'll say no more. Cade, over to you.
Hi, my name is Cade Metz. I'm a reporter with the New York Times, where I cover emerging technologies, including the rise of AI. We do have kind of a split panel today. In person, we have Alexander Khanin, CEO of MTS AI, Denelise Lecluse, Managing Director for Continental Europe for BSI, and Professor Jeroen van Hoven, Professor of Ethics and Technology with Delft University of Technology. And then virtually, I'm virtual, of course, and we're going to be joined by Sandeep, Dadlani, Chief Digital Officer of Mars, and Francesco Marzoni, Chief Data and Analytics Officer of IKEA Retail. Again, we're talking about the way the pandemic has disrupted business and then potentially how we could deal with that with so-called AI technology. Alexander, if you can hear me, maybe we'll start with you. What would be good is to lay out this disruption we're talking about. You know, how has the pandemic changed the business landscape? Where are the hurdles that businesses are facing, and what do they need to think about when it comes to technological changes? Let's talk about the problems first, where the problems are, and then maybe we could talk about the solutions.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So thanks for having me here. So in our company, so I think that the COVID brings much more disruption and innovation than any chief data transformation officer. Yeah, so in the same time, it was a lot of issues and risk we had to overcome. And inside, so we selected the 3 directions in the business. So the first one is omnichannel communication and conversational AI, because millions of people around the globe working from home, but they still need a lot of services and tools to work. And we invested a lot in creation the AI, which can do like the chatbots, like voice robots, facial recognition, so all the services which allow to continue provide top-level services, even for remote customers and employees. So the second big direction is contactless services, like contactless payment, contactless access to the transport, contactless access to the office. So I mean using like AI for facial recognition to do like face-to-pay application, to get inside the subway, etc., etc. And I think we really did the great job. So, for example, we just launched the biggest project in the world. So the Moscow subway. So in Moscow, about 12 million passengers using the subway every day. And now we allowed all the passengers to get access inside without using any, without touching any surfaces, without cash. So all you need is your face. And now it's working for 12 million passengers every day. So, and I think it's a huge disruption. And the same we did, for example, for Emirates NBD Bank, the biggest bank in Middle East. Now all the customers, all the clients of the bank, they can use all the bank services remotely by using KYC, by their face, by reading their photo ID. And if you want to become the customer of the bank, you don't have to go, no need to go to the branch office. All you need is to go to the App Store, download the app, register yourself, and then using the bank. So all remotely. And the third direction in our company is edge computing. Edge computing combining with 5G. So we see the explosion in the growth of robotics and edge computing. And so we invested in Neuron company, founded by previous managers of Qualcomm Corporation. And now jointly we are working on super energy efficient AI for edge computing. So we're creating neural processing units, so very small but very powerful chips, to allow robotics, to allow all the distributed calculations to be done to meet all the challenges of the COVID.
And how about you, Denelise? What are you seeing, post-COVID, just in terms of the business landscape? What are people struggling to deal with, as we start to think about, how they can deal with those issues?
I think what we saw in the pandemic is that we can innovate much faster than we thought we could. I can see that in my own organization, but also outside of our organization. And what you then see after the pandemic, now that we were getting through this, or not completely through it, I think, is that we really have to look at continuing that faster innovation. We can keep it up because there's a couple of world's problems every company now has on their agenda, much more closer than they had them before, sustainability and digital transformation. So we need to make use of innovation to make sure that we tackle these challenges. Now, to the point of all these great new technologies out there, which give us all the opportunities to deliver more value, better services to our clients, take care of our people better. To all those points, we have to take into account that we have to be able to trust that technology. And that is something I think post-pandemic we should really talk about. How can we trust all those technologies, make sure that they're safe?
And joining us online, Francesco, how do you see the landscape here? Do you see significant changes in the way business operate? Do you see opportunities?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that if I look at the two macro areas where our needs, and I would say also our industry needs, accelerated, I would call out on one side how we deal more in real time with supply chain disruptions. I would say both during the first part of the pandemic, but also on a ongoing basis, as we are experiencing right now, also a big crisis across industries in raw material availability and in transportation, as well as probably the other macro area would be around how we deal with an exponentially growing volume of delivery services. For us, it's going to be key as a retailer at IKEA to manage those two dynamics and macro areas of impact, not only now, while we're facing the crisis, but also on a ongoing basis, because this crisis set some new benchmark also for customer behaviors in this respect. So if I need to call out three areas where AI capabilities really accelerated in this respect, and then by the way, I would be also happy to talk about a foundational learning that we are getting at IKEA and across many companies out of these areas. I would call out these three areas that are: the first one, how we leverage real-time, more real-time demand sensing and data signals in order to orchestrate our fulfillment processes and ultimately deliver orders from the points where we have maximum availability and highest speed to serve customer needs. Their real-time data and algorithms, real-time algorithmic processing play a key role. The second one is around robotic automation. Actually, we have an example of efforts that we're driving right now in Finland. With exponential growth of delivery services, we really saw the need of accelerating also our roadmap in introducing robotic automation in our picking processes. This results in more ergonomic ways of working for our co-workers in the store, but also into more capacity actually that we free up for those co-workers in order to then process a higher volume of orders, as well as to address a broader set of customer needs. As a matter of fact, just this experiment that I'm talking about in Finland actually resulted in the creation of even 180 jobs more compared to the pre-crisis era. And then the last thing that I will call out, despite Alexander also mentioned that, is if I think about all our self-checkout capabilities in store, that also created a big acceleration, both in terms of contactless solutions, but I would say also in terms of how we learn to apply visual intelligence capabilities based on image recognition. For example, at the self-checkout of our restaurants, the ones that you find in every IKEA store worldwide.
Jeroen, maybe we'll go to you here on stage. We've in the last few minutes mentioned several technologies that could be useful at this time, whether it's chatbots online or robotics or self-checkout, facial recognition. In your mind, to what extent are these technologies up to the task? Are they ready to deal with these issues today for the average business? Or does the technology still need to develop before it's really deployed and it really starts doing these things that we've been talking about?
To whom is that? Is it to me, Cade? Or?
To you.
Yeah. Well, I think in part that's a technical question, and that should be directed at the people who are doing the engineering. And I'm a philosopher, I can disclose that. I'm an ethicist, so I think about the ethical and the societal impacts. From that point of view, I've seen a lot of struggling, indicating that we were not ready to deal with the problems. Of course, in part that was caused by the fact that it was an epidemic, it was a catastrophe, it was a crisis, and that needed to be resolved on the spot, and we need to improvise. But to a certain extent, it was also the outcome of the fact that we have a too, let's say, superficial idea about innovation. We have been talking about innovation, and that's new functionality, something that we didn't have before, but we now have, and allows us to do certain things that we couldn't do before. But you have to worry, and you have to ask, the first question you have to ask is, will this allow us to solve the problems really that are in front of us, that are on the table? And secondly, are we not creating new problems or exacerbating old problems, right? And can we be in compliance, and can we accommodate and respect the values that are very central to us? And I've seen a lot of struggling with liberty, with privacy, with constraining autonomous choice of people. So my point would be the real innovation, the real challenge is not so much the creation of new functionality. It is creating new functionality to solve problems in a way that respects the things that are very central to us, to our concerns, the moral concerns. And that's exactly the notion that the European Commission is putting on the table with the AI regulation. They hope to achieve the same thing as they achieved with the GDPR, with the privacy regulation, setting a global standard by means of European law. And the core idea is you can do everything with innovation, with technology, and it's great, it's wonderful, but we need to abide, we have to stick to the core principles. So that's the real challenge. The rest is relatively simple. I'm offending my colleagues who are doing the engineering in Delft, of course, now, but it's not simple, of course. But really kind of coming up with breakthrough technologies and at the same time not throwing the baby out with the moral baby with the bathwater, right? So that's, and I think we need to prepare us for more. There will be more coming, so we need to be able to innovate responsibly. That needs to be part of our corporate DNA, of our training of new generation of engineers in the field of AI and data science. And that's exactly what the European Commission will be asking from us.
I think it's a great point, and later in the panel we'll go into the specifics there. What we need to be thinking about. But before we do that, let's pull in Sandeep of Mars. What do you think here? You haven't had your say yet. What problems have been created by the pandemic, and potentially how can we deal with those problems through technology, through what we call AI?
Well, thank you, Cade. Today is actually National M&M's Day, so I have my favorite M&M's characters with me for this panel. So I got them along without your permission. So thank you for that. Listen, I think the last 18 months have shown us how fragile we all are, but how resilient we all are. And frankly, in Mars, we have sort of discovered a new clock speed. I love the professor's comments. In fact, we have two similar questions that we ask in Mars before we undertake an AI project. Number one, who is this project amplifying? Not what, but who. Is it a consumer? Is it a Mars associate? How is this AI amplifying that person's emotions, that person's actions? And second, what is the specific problem that we are solving for? So if I look at the last 18 months, we faced new unexpected problems every day. And we had the data scientists now suddenly in the middle of our boardrooms telling us and predicting through very complex frameworks when we were worried about our associates and their safety, which factories can open up faster, which wet hospitals, we are one of the largest wet hospital chains in the world, which wet hospitals can open up faster. The next thing we had to do was adapt and get into problems like how do our 12,000 plus vet and vet associates see their pets? So we had to pivot using some very sophisticated AI into telehealth consultations for vets. In our factories, when some associates couldn't show up, the junior associates in the factories had to use AI technology to then do some augmented reality in terms of line changes in the factory. The senior associates from home were guiding the junior associates, again through video conference and some AI, and so on. And finally, when we were looking at our pets and their pathology reports, we didn't have enough pathologists and radiologists to help us discover those problems. And over a dozen plus sprints, we figured out a way to grade cancer tumors in pet faster, something that now we are working with Stanford to translate to human health as well. In all, we now have 200 plus AI programs at scale, not those flashy pilots. So I'm very optimistic that the pandemic helped us unlock 100x speed that we knew we had, but we somehow were not able to express ourselves. That urgency, that burning platform wasn't there. And by focusing on our consumer and the associate, we've been able to unlock that speed. Now, how we move forward, whether we can retain that empathy and that speed together within the guidelines the professor just laid down, is going to be interesting.
Absolutely, absolutely. Alexander on stage, let's go back to you. Dr. Van Hoven talked about, maybe the easy part is deploying the technology, but really, how easy is it? You mentioned two technologies in particular that interest me, chatbots and robotics, right? In both those areas, we've seen some real progress in recent years, the technology improving. But, what are the limitations there? are chatbots ready, for deployment at scale? What can they do and what can they not? To what extent are robotics ready for warehouses, sorting through objects as we ship them across the globe, which is a big problem, an application we're dealing with now. Where are these technologies ready, and where are we still waiting for the technology to improve so we can actually put them into place?
Yeah, so this is a really great question. So when we're talking about chatbots, so we should understand that this is not like a rule-based list of questions and answers. So it's really difficult and super complicated thing that we call NLP engine, natural language processing engine. And right now, so I think the chatbots, they're super far away of like human level interaction. But when we want to automate some routine, like when we call to the contact center to change your flight date, or when you want to understand how rich you are calling to your bank manager. So for such things, both chatbot and voice bots are ready. And right now, in everyday life, we have 37 million customers using the chatbots and voice bots every day. And we saved, we saved millions of working hours of the people on answering the very routine and typical questions. Yeah. But if you want to discuss with the chatbot some things or like some piece of art, so it's impossible because they don't have the understanding and imagination. Yeah, so they can. So they learned on their on the billions of different conversations, public available conversations in internet. And so we usually do the fine-tuning of the conversation for concrete business. So I can say, yeah, so it's not the future. It's already working for 37 million customers, but it's still far away from the human level interaction. But I hope we will reach this level in next 5 or 7 years. So we have it in our strategy. And when we are talking about robotics, so by the way, I have background. I have background in robotics. I was doing autonomous driving and some service robotics. Yeah. So in robotics, we have the three problems. So the first problem is artificial muscles. So we need lightweight muscles. Instead of some engines, yeah. So the second problem is battery life, and the third one is the brain, computer vision system, navigation system, and Edge AI model on which you will handle all these calculations. So this is three barriers for robotics. But even just imagine that today we will overcome all the issues with the chatbots and robotics. We still have a lot of issues and the barriers in regulation. So the speed of change of technology is much faster than speed of change of regulation. And it's a big challenge for business, for research, for academia, work to work like a joint team with the regulation guys. Yeah.
Denelise, let's go back to you. These types of technologies we've been talking about here, specifically chatbots, robotics, self-checkout, face recognition, are those types of technologies relevant for the businesses you deal with, the businesses that you see? Are they ready for use? And if not, like, what are the technologies that can be useful, today, for the businesses you deal with, for the businesses that you see?
Well, BSI, as a British Standards Institute, we serve a lot of businesses worldwide. I sometimes say that we help the best of the best to get better. So many of these technologies we see at our clients. I think there's a couple of really interesting remarks here, and I'd like to relate back to what Alexander said, that the technology is actually moving faster than regulations can follow. And I see some of my panel members nodding here. And to the point of Jeroen earlier, there are basically two strands going on, or two streams going on in the world. One is the one where we look at what is really innovation, what's really going to help us solve our world problems. We should direct our investments on an EU level, on a world level even, towards really looking what is good for our planet. And at the same time, there are tons of new technologies which are already being used, ready or not. What is ready? I would say it is ready when the two come together. So when we are sure that the technologies we're using, the facial recognition, the chatbots, all the robotics, they are ready when they have a good impact on our society, and they are checked against whether they have a good impact or not. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges post-pandemic we'll face, because during pandemic especially, regulations went less. Now, the innovation or new technologies went up because of less regulations. But then at the same time, when that happened, you could also argue how safe, how trustworthy are all those things we have invented now. So all companies, including ours and all the clients we serve and our stakeholders, should put our hands together and find out ways to make sure that we don't go crazy with all those new technologies and we do realize our impact on society.
Let's go back to Dr. Vandenhoven on that. So, what are the specific issues that we need to think about here with these types of technologies? One thing that at the Times we've written a lot about recently is the bias issue with so many of these technologies. How big of an issue is that, and what are the other specific issues that we all need to be thinking about as we build and deploy these technologies?
Yeah, I think a core issue is transparency, accountability, and let's say accountability. So the fact that we're looking at, and so the quest for XAI, explainable AI, because if you don't know exactly what you're doing and you're putting out there in the world, it's very difficult to bear responsibility. And that is, I think, a key theme. Of course, there are many, many more, right? And I will mention a couple, but I think core is that artificial intelligence is making a problem of some sorts out of our responsibility, because it's possibly chipping away at the conditions that need to be in place for people to bear responsibility or to make it possible to hold each other responsible, because they may be, let's say, manipulated by AI and data. We've seen many examples, right? So you can nudge people into particular behavior. So can they then say, yes, I did this voluntarily, I chose to do this? They can plead plausible deniability. They say, well, I was manipulated by this technology. Or they say, I didn't know about it. It was just intransparent. It was it presented itself like a black box. How could I have known? So all of these conditions need to be in place for people in these complex and rapidly evolving ecosystems of data and AI to bear responsibility and for it to make sense to hold each other responsible. So I think that should be our major concern. Then, of course, there is privacy. It soaks up a lot of data. It uses a lot of data. It requires a lot of data. But coming back to robotics, for example, there is autonomous systems. We are driven towards higher levels of autonomy in this robotics for good reasons, right? But it makes a problem, again, out of responsibility, because if lethal autonomous weapon systems are acting on their own accord, they're engaging targets without human intervention, then who can be held accountable or responsible when things go wrong? So now one of the quests here is meaningful human control in high levels of autonomous systems. Then, of course, there's the little issue of work and replacement of human beings in the labor force by these technologies. So fairness, does everyone have the same chance of having the benefits of the technology? So what does a fair and just society look like? And one of the problems is that the corporate players are so dominant, the big tech industry is so dominant in this field that we may fear that because they are motivated by quarterly revenues, and they understandably are, but their first concern is not the health of the democracy or equality and justice, a just, fair society. That may be an afterthought. And that is, I think, something that we need to be aware of, and that may also undermine the trust that consumers, patients, citizens may have in this technology, and then we are, from the fire into the frying pan. I think you also alluded to that. Trust is really important, and trust is based upon the fact that people are motivated from a moral point of view. They take their values seriously, and this means that the engineers want to put them in practice into the things they make. Right, the right values introduced and inserted in the services and the artifacts that they make, and that they can explain to citizens and consumers how they have done so. That is very important.
Sandeep, let's go back to you for one more question, then maybe we'll take questions from the audience. When you hear about these ethical issues, like I said, we at the time spent a lot of time writing about this. The big companies that Dr. Hoven alluded to, the Googles and the Amazon, the Facebooks, are being forced to deal with these issues. In the AI research field, this is discussed a lot. In your world, is it discussed a lot? Are these issues that come up often? As you deploy all those AI applications that you talked about, are guardrails put in place? Are the possibilities of where these things can go wrong discussed? Fairness and bias and whatever else.
Absolutely. I loved what Dr. Vandenhoeven said about bias. First of all, the bias is real. And I want to explain this with an example. When you take a tissue sample from a pet and it's analyzed by a pathologist, and we count cancer cells, mitotic cells, when a human pathologist counts it, we found that humans are inherently optimistic and we undercount the cancer cells. Now, when an AI trained by thousands of humans start counting it, actually the AI overcompensates depending on the model you use and overcounts it. So now what do? The human is undercounting it, there's a bias. The AI is overcompensating for that bias. And so the only way this works is if the human and AI come together, and then human has the overriding challenge of saying, okay, this is the right method. And the human starts to learn along with the AI. And so we've encountered this bias in all our programs very carefully. The big guardrails we have to have is is this AI project amplifying a consumer or an associate to do their work faster, to solve the specific problem faster? Are we moving towards our purpose? For example, one of our purposes is to make a better world for pets. Are we moving towards that purpose? So within a company context that's fair, eventually all these are exponential amplification platforms. So it literally amplifies our intent, our consciousness, our bias. But just a few weeks ago, we made a commitment to be net zero on our carbon footprint, on our GHG emissions, in all scope one, scope two, and scope three, which means our extended value chain, which means thousands of farmers and agricultural land and so on. We actually are betting that these same technologies, especially AI, is going to help us get there. So, in summary, the biases are real. We have very strong debate right now. For example, there's a debate on certain social platforms, whether advertising on certain social platforms is ethical or not, because of the way they are, exponentially amplifying our message or not, depending on the intent. So the debates are true, the biases are true. Our guardrails remain many, but within the purpose and consumers in mind. But we also believe that without these tools, without such exponential amplification, we won't meet many of our goals as with relates to the planet, with relates to the company, our consumers, and our associates. Does that make sense?
It sure does.